All right, let's. As this is all happening, it's it really does feel like, I watched a little bit of Morning Joe this morning because I was just curious. I know it's first time in ever, and it was they had Anand Giridharadas on.
They really did.
Yep, and he
I'm
was
not familiar with who you're talking about.
He was on. Well, and it is. But it's fascinating to see all these things sort of line up.
Yeah, they're
okay.
converging.
I mean, because they spent the whole day talking about the shutdown. It wasn't Joe and Mika. It was it was Willie Nelson or whatever the guy's name is.
Oh, that's that guy's name?
No, I don't think it's Nelson.
Willie Geist.
Willie Geist.
Willie Geist.
So Willie Geist was hosting, but
Great guy.
they're talking about the shutdown, and it's getting serious, right? And they're mocking in the same way that we have Donald Trump and Wilbur Ross and Larry Kudlow trying to seem like they have, actual warm blood flowing through their veins.
Like the millennials.
But then the story that is coming out of Davos, the main story is the critique of Davos. At this point, at least in what's in the and Davos has been sort of out of the news for the past couple of cycles, and part of it is that there's this critique out there, and they've let people into the building on some level where the critique is. And here is an exchange, and this is just a stunning exchange for multiple reasons, and I think they should be obvious to a lot of people. A Washington Post reporter is moderating this panel, and it's a Washington Post panel. The reporter is Heather Long. She just does like a general beat. She's an she is Chironed here as an economics correspondent for the Washington Post. Now, I just want everybody to sort of sit with that for a moment and imagine what the baseline knowledge of the United States economy and just the things like the history of the economy, basic stuff, basic, just knowledge of how the tax system works, just very basic overview. She is doing this panel. On it is this guy, is Michael Dell from Dell Computers, right? Mm-hmm. And this guy from MIT named Erik Brynjolfsson. He is the director of MIT's initiative on the digital economy. And so here's the exchange. She asks a question. They get a big laugh because the idea of actual, tax regime is hilarious. But listen to where this goes.
There are growing calls to address these inequalities, particularly the wage inequality, with more taxes. In particular, in the United States, there's been a call by Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez to tax people earning over $10 million at a 70% tax rate. The current top rate in the United States is 37%. Michael Dell, do you support this?
I just want to say I'm thrilled that they're asking.
Wow, what a great question. Well, look, I mean, my wife and I set up a foundation about 20 years ago.
Pause it. I just love the fact that he can't even joke around. Like, they're all laughing, and he immediately goes to the talking points that he goes into defense mode.
And can we just say that Bill Gates, who's more classy and less, I hate Bill Gates, but he's less of like an obvious moron than Michael Dell, made exactly the same point.
About 20 years ago, and we would have contributed quite a bit more than a 70% tax rate on my income, on my annual income. And I feel much more comfortable with our ability as a private foundation to allocate those funds than I do giving them to the government.
All right.
So no, I'm not supportive of that.
Well, Keith.
And I don't think it would help the growth of the U.S. economy.
Oh, that's interesting. And can you say a little bit more about why you don't think it would?
Well, name a country where that's worked, ever.
United States.
Briefly in the 80s.
No.
All right, pause it for a second. No, pause it for a second. First off, she is completely stumped by his challenge. Name a country where it's worked. In addition to having no further really follow-up. This is an economics correspondent for arguably the second most important newspaper in the country. I don't know where it would rank internationally, but a fairly important paper that internationally as well. An economics correspondent, maybe not the economics correspondent. And she says for a short time in the 80s. Now,
Yeah. When Reagan knocked it up, he whacked it up to 80%.
the
the plutocrats.
top marginal tax rate starting in 1936 through till 1982 was never below 70%. The highest was in the 90s, and that was for over 10 to 15 years. It was in the high 80s from like 36 to 50, maybe hitting 90 occasionally.
These reporters just worship the orthodoxy of the current economy.
These
That's what it
reporters
is.
don't have Google.
Yeah.
They
well,
don't like they don't like. Hey, I'm going and I am the economics correspondent for the Washington Post, and I'm going to ask Michael Dell about these tax
yeah,
rates.
yeah.
I wonder what the tax rates have been in this country that I am an economics correspondent for in the second most
One
important
of the
newspaper.
magic
Like,
features
just-
of the modern economy that you're always writing like dumb like tributes to in the Washington Post is Google.
It's
Which
could
you
have
could
used
use.
a Dell computer.
You
exactly.
could use a Dell computer, and then you go to
just-
Google, and then you discover how to not embarrass
There's just
yourself.
something fundamentally wrong with everything that this basic level of competency when you head into it's just mind blowing.
But you know what it is, guys. I think she's more interested in ideas.
It's ideas. But wait a second. So fortunately, they have I guess you need to be a professor at MIT to know this. But go.
Of the U.S. economy.
Oh, that's interesting. And can you say a little bit more about why? Why you don't think it would?
Well, name a country where that's worked ever.
United States.
Briefly in the 80s.
No. From about the 1930s through about the 1960s, the tax rate averaged about 70%. At times it was up as high as 95%. And those were actually pretty good years for growth. So I don't have a strong opinion on that proposal. A lot of the devil is in the details. But I think there's actually a lot of economics that suggests that it's not necessarily going to hurt growth.
Yeah. I mean, and it wasn't 82. The top marginal tax rate went down to 50%. And then in 86, I think it was, for the big omnibus tax reform, I think it went down to where it is now, like in the high 30s. And during that period of time, it was post-war, granted. They call it the Great Compression. The economy worked for more people, broadly speaking, than it has in terms of wealth inequality and in terms of everyone, living a decent middle-class life. Black people didn't share in a lot of this, and part of it was by design by the U.S. government, frankly. But that's the reality. But the idea that just the basic, I'm just flabbergasted by the reporter more than anything else. I can
yeah.
understand.
She comes off the worst.
Doesn't she? I
Yeah.
mean,
and I've never seen something so satisfying as that MIT reporter bodying her. I mean, I can say it because I'm a woman.
right there you go.
But yeah, I mean, it's mind-boggling. I think that when you see reporting around economics, the CNBCs of the world, and I'd include her in that. It's not even about the history. It's not about looking at policy even. It's about this kind of disturbing worship of corporate culture and of wealth building. And economic forums like Davos, are part of that weird worship. It's a capitalism shrine, basically, and they're just kind of stenographers about what's going on currently, as opposed to giving context as to how things were all in the past. I think that was a prime example of it, an egregious example.
And it also is a great example of the implications of someone who gets elected in a primary with 25,000 votes in Queens, and you were following around AOC during that primary, in the run-up to the primary.
Oh yeah, I was one of the first people, I think. So it was about a year ago, in March. So that's when I first covered her, or did that full day report on her.
And that question obviously doesn't come up. And I think that MIT guy is probably more emboldened to bring that up, or all of it. I mean, it's just.
Well, I think that's the other dynamic of because Davos, I think, has always invited, they like to have okay, come give us a little critique to prove that we're willing to be criticized. But if you're in a room with like a couple hundred, literally the global elites, right? Like in the proper usage of the word, and then you just know it's going to be streamed on C-SPAN and nobody's going to watch it because it's really boring after you get over the novelty of watching Bono lecture some leader from Zimbabwe on debt relief or other nonsense that happens at Davos. But now because of social media, their market, and Anand gets this better than anybody else. It's not Davos. It's the fact that I'm going to get clipped pissing Tony Blair off.
Right.
That's going to go viral. And that's the whole point of this conference is Michael Dell looks like an idiot. They are whining about tax rates and then doing bizarre exercises where they pretend to be migrants as experiential learning. And it's for the rest of us to look at them and go, oh, you people should be in the dustbin of history. You've ruined the world and you're delusional.
I'd say we're about 3 years away from Davos being a lot less public.
Turning into Bilderberg.
Oh, yeah. Like a government in exile.
I think it's going to be no social media.
Definitely.
We need to be able to really exchange
we need to be able
ideas,
to think.
and we don't want people to interrupt with this.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Here is another example of Davos basically people basically jujitsuing Davos in some way. I'm glad you've all assembled here to make each other feel good, and now we're going to use you as an example of everything that's wrong. And this is a Time magazine panel on the state of inequality. They invited this guy Rutger Bregman. He's an author. I don't know what else his credentials are, but he's written he wrote another book about wealth inequality and the disequilibrium that's created by having such wealthy people. And I think where is he from? He's European, obviously.
It's
Dutch. All right. Here is the exchange,
From New Jersey.
and it's interesting to look at. I don't know who the other panelists are, but they're all wait a second. Nobody likes to have one of those comments that indicts everybody for being on stage.
This is my first time at Davos, and I find it quite a bewildering experience, to be honest. I mean, 1,500 private jets have flown in here to hear Sir David Attenborough speak about, how we're wrecking the planet. And I hear people talk in the language of participation and justice and equality and transparency. But then, almost no one raises the real issue of tax avoidance, right? And of the rich just not paying their fair share. It feels like I'm at a firefighters conference and no one's allowed to speak about water, right? there was only one panel, actually.
We've had two. You're the second of our panelists.
There was only one panel.
Let's go there.
One panel hidden away in the media center that was actually tax avoidance. Yeah. I was one of the 15 participants. So something needs to change here. 10 years ago, the World Economic Forum asked the question, what must industry do to prevent a broad social backlash? The answer is very simple. Just stop talking about philanthropy and start talking about taxes. Taxes. We need just 2 days ago, there was a billionaire in here, what's his name? Michael Dell. And he asked the question name me one country where a top marginal tax rate of 70% has actually worked. Mm-hmm. And, I'm a historian. The United States, that's where it has actually worked. In the 1950s, during Republican President Eisenhower, the war veteran, the top marginal tax rate in the US was 91% for people like Michael Dell. The top estate tax for people like Michael Dell was more than 70%. I mean, this is not rocket science. I mean, we can talk for a very long time about all these stupid philanthropy schemes. We can invite Bono once more, but come on, we got to be talking about taxes.
Yeah,
That's it, taxes, taxes, taxes. All the rest is bullshit, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Yes, enjoy your last time at Davos. I mean, that's I mean, it's obvious. It's a lot shorter conference if that's the only panel that you have, right? Which is the one which talks about tax avoidance and basically these schemes in which to roll back taxes. I mean,
And they don't get to self-aggrandize about all the philanthropy and foundations, as Michael Dell did in his first breath after that question was asked of him.
While he was justifying tax avoidance. I mean, there's net exit of capital from Africa because of tax avoidance schemes that cancels all of the because they love the Africa savior complex.
But
at
if you buy a
Davos.
cow for a local business person in Africa, that'll change it.
Yeah, Michael Dell's like, I'd much prefer to buy a cow for someone in Malawi than be taxed.
A lot of
And
malaria
I feel a lot
nets.
more comfortable with that.
There was also a massive report that came out just, I think, at the beginning of this week, probably timed for Davos, which showed that a very, very strong correlation between companies that have donated to nonprofits and those nonprofits turning around and advocating for deregulatory practices on those companies, just willy-nilly.
Really?
I know that's very shocking to you. I hope we haven't ruined any of your illusions.
I know. I'm a mere 24, but I still am as cynical, I feel like, as everyone at the table. So
It's a little sad. It's a
Yeah.
little sad.